Hi guys, welcome back. Today we are going to be planting our tomatoes, and I thought I'd put together a video to talk about a very common problem with tomatoes. It is early blight. If you grow tomatoes, I'm sure you've dealt with early blight. I think it's pretty much everywhere people grow tomatoes, there's the opportunity for early blight or alternaria. Alternaria is the fungus that causes early blight. And so I thought it might be a good idea to put together a video to discuss how this stuff works and some things you can do to try to avoid it. In order to deal with early blight organically, quite often it's going to be a multi-pronged approach if you really want it to be effective. There is no silver bullet as far as, well, you can spray it with hydrogen peroxide, some folks say. You can spray it with baking soda. These things can be helpful, but they're not going to be a silver bullet most of the time. Typically, you're going to want to use a lot of cultural controls, and you want to have a lot of other things in place if you really want to try to control early blight in an organic means. So in order to do that, and I'm a very strong advocate of this, you need to understand the disease and understand how it works, and then with that knowledge, you can put things in place to try to reduce your disease pressure, and then use these sprays that are out there, these organic sprays that are out there, to kind of make up the difference. So what is early blight? Early blight is a fungus. It's Alternaria. Alternaria is what they call it, Alternaria solanae. They just recently kind of semi-officially changed the name to Alternaria tomatophylla. But anyways, it's a fungus, and it predominantly lives or overwinters in your soil. Wherever you grow tomatoes, it's very common you're going to have it in your soil. Chances are you're going to run into it. You're not going to eradicate it from your soil. You're not going to get rid of it. It is very common in the environment. So it's going to be an issue at some point in time. Now, there are things you can do. Again, from an organic point of view, you want to use kind of a multi-pronged approach to deal with this. Some things that you can do to help reduce that inoculum that's in your soil is, in the fall when you're cleaning up your garden, don't leave your tomato plants in there. Take your tomato plants out, remove them, get rid of them. Throw them out in the woods, burn them, throw them in a trash bag, whatever. At least by doing that, you can reduce some of the inoculum that's going to overwinter in your soil. Now, that alone is not going to solve the problem, not at all. But it can help. Any little bit that you can do to help reduce disease pressures is going to help reduce disease problems the following year. And the way this Alternaria affects your plants is there's really it's a two-pronged attack on your plants, kind of. You have your primary infection, and you have secondary infections. And these are really important to understand these things. Primary infection is going to come from your soil, like we just talked about. And usually that is going to require a rain event. Okay, what happens is the rain comes down, it hits your soil, and it splashes up in the air a little bit. You get a little bit of wind, some of that dirt, debris, and fungal spores, they'll get onto the undersides of your plant leaves. Underside plant leaves are very prone to disease because they have stomates, they have openings in there. It makes it very easy for the hyphae to get in there and infect your plants. And then they start to infect the bottom leaves of your plants. Okay, that's your primary infection stage, and it requires a rain event for the most part. Now, the secondary infection, and this is where the primary infection, understanding the primary infection is very important, because the secondary infection is once your leaves are infected, you're going to get those little black rings on your leaves. If you've had it before, you know what I'm talking about. The secondary infection does not necessarily require a rain event. It just requires moisture. Those little rings are full of spores. And if you get some moisture on those rings, and if your temperatures are right, those are going to open up and they're going to spit out more spores. And this is kind of important because that moisture event could be something as simple as morning dew, which you get like every morning, which means every morning you've got the potential for more infection. Okay, so understanding that kind of helps you to understand how important it is to really try to control that primary infection before it starts. So what can we do to try to eliminate that primary infection, knowing that that fungus, that alternaria, is going to be in your soil. There's a few steps that you can take to try to eliminate that primary infection. First and foremost, these are things that I do. Okay, first what I do is I grow my tomato plants on so that they're pretty tall before I even plant them in a garden. And I do that so that I can plant them deep in the ground, because you always want to plant your tomatoes deep. Okay, and then I still have a good tall plant, so I can take those bottom leaves right off the plant. I'm sure you've seen this if you watch other videos. Remove those bottom leaves right off the plant so that you have a good space between the soil and your first set of leaves. That kind of creates a social distancing, if you would, you know, so that that alternaria is going to have a harder time getting up and reaching those bottom leaves. And when I say a good distance, I don't mean 2 or 3 inches. I mean, you know, 8 or 10 or 12 inches. You want to have a good distance there if you can do it, if it's feasible. The other thing you can do is put down a good layer of mulch. I use grass clippings, I use wood chips, put down a nice thick layer of mulch, and that basically creates a barrier that makes it harder for those spores to pop up through and actually infect your plant. And this can be really important early in the season. Because the third thing that you want to do is you want to have good healthy plants. And this is something I always talk about in a lot of my videos, is that, you know, focus on growing good healthy plants, because good healthy plants are going to be way less prone to getting infected by these things than a plant that's already under stress. Stressed plants, just like people, stressed plants are going to be more prone to getting sick. They're going to be more prone to having diseases. They're not going to have their immune system in check. You know, things are not working properly. So always start with good healthy plants, plant them a little deep, try to have your space there, and get a good layer of mulch on there to create a barrier so that those spores can't come up out of the ground and infect your plants. Because early in the season, when you first plant your plants, they're going to be stressed, and that's going to make them more prone to the disease. Okay? There's also a few myths out there. There are some folks that feel that they call it early blight because it only affects your plants early in the spring. That is not true. Early blight can infect your plants anytime the temperatures are above 55, 60 degrees with a little bit of moisture. Again, that primary infection needs an actual rainfall, but after that, the secondary infections only need moisture. In fact, most of the research shows that 80-degree temperatures is the prime temperature for this stuff to spread and take hold in your plants. So you can get infected right through the whole growing season. This is not just an early spring disease. I mean, this is something you can get throughout the entire course of the season. So you got your healthy plants, you plant them deep, you got your mulch in place, you got your lower leaves cleaned off. Okay, these are all cultural controls to help reduce the opportunity for those spores to infect your plants. Now, there are also some sprays that you can use, and this is how I address it. One of the things, I use biological fungicides. I'm a very big fan of biological fungicides because not only are you helping to reduce disease pressures, but you're also adding good bacteria to your soil, and I'm a huge fan of that. So I use the Revitalize, which is a beneficial bacteria put out by Bonide. It helps to colonize the roots and colonize the soil. It kind of outcompetes some of the bad bacteria and things like that. And then early on in the season, again, when you're most prone to getting that primary infection because your plants are stressed or because they might be shorter plants, so you're going to inevitably have leaves that are closer to the ground, I will use some copper. I'll use a copper spray, and I will put it out right before the rain comes. Remember, you need rain for that event to take place. Copper is a preventative fungicide. Most fungicides are preventative, with very few exceptions. And so what they do is they create a layer of protection on your plant, like a shield, so that when those spores do come up, they don't have the opportunity to actually infect your plant. That copper will stop them from being able to infect your leaves. It is a preventative fungicide. It is very important that you put this stuff out before it rains. A day before it rains, I'll go out and I'll spray my plants with copper. This way, when it does rain, it's going to make it very difficult, if any of those spores are able to get up there, Be very difficult for them to actually take hold in my plant. Now, that being said, I'm not a huge fan. I don't like spraying my actual food with copper fungicide. Okay, I don't mind using it early in the season, before the plant has any tomatoes on it, before I'm producing any fruit. I use it because it's probably the most effective fungicide that's organically accepted that you can use for early blight. Once my plants start actually growing tomatoes, once I actually have food on there that I'm going to eat, I will kind of change over, because now at this stage, now my plants are established. Hopefully they're healthy, they're vigorous, they're taller, so I can take more bottom leaves off and have more of a space. So I've got a few more things in my favor to help reduce that primary infection. So at that point, I will start to use baking soda or hydrogen peroxide. And you'll see people talk about these things, how you can use these things. Here's the deal with this. Baking soda is a legitimate fungicide. In fact, you can actually buy baking soda fungicide. It's called Millstop, and there's a couple of other brands out there as well. And it's literally baking soda, but it is EPA registered. It is labeled for use, and so commercial growers, they have to use products that are labeled for use, or professionals like myself. If I want to apply something at a customer's house, I can't just take some Arm & Hammer and throw it in a jug. I have to actually use a labeled product. Millstop is a labeled fungicide, and it is baking soda, potassium bicarbonate. And the label rate for that is 1 tablespoon per gallon, and it is labeled for alternaria. Now, here's the truth of it. It can help. Okay, like I kind of said before, if you're going to do things organically, there's no silver bullet. You have to use a lot of different strategies in order to achieve a good control. Potassium bicarbonate, baking soda, and water can help as a protectant fungicide, much like the copper. It is not curative. It is not going to cure an infection that you already have. It is a protectant, so it will help to create a barrier on your leaves. It adjusts the pH on your tomato leaves to the point where it makes it harder for those spores to get in, because the pH isn't quite what they like, what's best for them to infect your plant. So it can help. Another one is hydrogen peroxide. There are hydrogen peroxide based fungicides out there. Xerotol is one, and I think they renamed that now to Oxidate or something like that. It's a legitimate fungicide. It's hydrogen peroxide. Technically it's hydrogen dioxide, but it's basically the same thing. Hydrogen peroxide is not preventative at all. It is strictly curative, and strictly curative for like 5 minutes, and that's it. So some folks recommend, well, I spray baking soda 1 week, and then peroxide the next week, and then baking soda 1 week, and then peroxide the next week. That's really kind of a hit or miss approach. Ideally, if you want to use these products to their best efficiency, what you want to be keeping in your mind is that the baking soda and water is going to be preventative. So you want to put that out right before the rain event comes. Okay, peroxide is going to be curative. So you would want to apply that right after the rain event occurs. Because here's the trick with almost all what they call curative fungicides, is that they're really only curative for maybe 48 to 72 hours after that rain event. If you get some rain and some of those spores make it through your baking soda or your copper or whatever, and actually are able to get in to infect your plant, if they really set into your plant, curative fungicides aren't going to stop them. Okay, you have to apply them pretty quickly after the rain event. I would say for peroxide, it's probably 48 hours. You probably got a day or two that if you get out there and you hit them with peroxide, there's a good chance you can kill off some of those spores before they can really take hold into your plant. So understanding that can kind of help with your timing. Understanding that, the peroxide should go down before the rain event. The baking soda should go down before the rain event to to protect your plants. The peroxide can go down immediately after the rain event to try to clean up anything that may have gotten through the peroxide. Okay, another thing that you want to do is if you start to see an infection, and usually it'll come in on your lower leaves first, eliminate them immediately. Cut those leaves off, throw them in a plastic bag, get them in the trash, get rid of them. Okay, because that secondary infection can be much more difficult to deal with, because remember I said that secondary infection does not require rain. It only requires moisture. So morning dew can cause those spores to pop open and continue to infect your plant. And you can get morning dew like every morning, which means that every single morning you've got that opportunity to have that infection spread up your plant. So if you see any leaves on there that are infected with early blight, cut them off and get rid of them immediately. It's one thing to deal with this when you have to kind of work your sprays around a rain event. It's a whole nother world when morning dew every single morning can cause a new infection or cause your infection to spread. So prevention is definitely worth, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Because if you can control that primary infection and keep that in check, it's going to make the whole rest of your growing season so much easier. Okay, other things that you want to think about is, of course, your watering habits. Now we know you don't want that stuff splashing up on your plants. So when you're watering your plants, do it, put your hose on like a drizzle, just a nice drizzle, and just put it right at the base of the plant and water just the soil. Don't sit there with the hose, with the hose nozzle spraying and the water splashing up all over the place, and because you're just creating an opportunity for that stuff to get into your plant. So use, good watering habits. Keep your plants healthy, proper fertilizing, proper soil pH, proper mulching, all those things. Keep your plants healthy. Use proper watering techniques so you're not getting your plants wet. And keep in mind how these different products work. Copper is protectant, baking soda and water is protectant, hydrogen peroxide is curative. It has absolutely no protectant abilities at all. If you spray your plants with hydrogen peroxide, within 5 or 10 minutes, it's done. It's not going to have any more effect on anything after 5 or 10 minutes. But in those 5 or 10 minutes, it can kill off some of those fungal spores that may have gotten through your organic protectant fungicide. Alright, so it's been about 6 weeks now since we planted these guys, and we have had a remarkably wet year this year. I just saw in the news, this is the 4th wettest July that we've had here in Connecticut in all of their record keeping. And we're only halfway through July. It's been raining like every day. I mean, it's beautiful right now, but we've had just a ridiculous amount of rain, which of course makes a perfect environment for this early blight to come through and get on my plants. So far we're doing pretty good. I mean, this one's great. I mean, there's a couple little spots in here, and I've been using the copper, and I've been using the peroxide, using the copper as the preventative, the copper as the curative, the hydrogen peroxide as the curative, and so far I'm pretty happy. We're starting to get some fruits on here now. I'd like to see more, but I think it's because of all the rain. We've had just cloud and overcast, and we haven't had the heat that these guys really want. So hopefully that'll change. We'll start getting some real sun and heat in here, and at this point I'm going to change over and I'm going to start using the baking soda, 1 tablespoon per gallon baking soda. We're going to see how that does. But so far, all things considered, considering the amount of rain that we've had this year, these plants are really holding up pretty well. I hope this video helps. I hope it gives you kind of an understanding of how this stuff works and some of the organic options that you can use. There are other options out there too. There's the biological fungicides like Revitalize or Serenade that can be useful in an organic situation. But I really think a big part of it are these cultural controls. Keeping these plants lifted up, getting the mulch in place, and understanding how these different fungicides work so that you can utilize them to be the most efficient, for the control of this disease. So again, I hope this helps, and hopefully it'll help you guys to grow your tomatoes, and hopefully you guys don't get as much rain as we've been dealing with. Thanks for watching. If you like this, and if this helped you out, give me a like, or subscribe, or a comment. Maybe you've got some other options that you use to control this stuff as well. And we'll see you soon.